Hi, my name is Amy, and this is my first portrait acrylic painting, and I'm going to walk you through what I did step by step so that hopefully your first portrait painting will look better than mine. I'm going to start by mixing the skin tone, and you mix that by doing equal parts of the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue. And then here I am going to just use any color. Here I chose a gray to just sketch out where I want my person to go. Now in this portrait, this is a young boy looking through a hole in a wooden fence. And this is actually my son, a picture of my son. So this is one that I'm probably going to keep, which is perfect for my first portrait painting. And here I'm going to start mixing that skin tone with, you see I put down yellow, red, and black. And so I watched a few other YouTube tutorials that said for skin tones, you want the forehead to be a little bit yellow, the middle of your face is a little bit more red, and the bottom part of your face is a little more gray. So I just did that big skin tone mix, and then I added in that yellow, red, and black to the top of my palette so I'd have all of those shades to work with. And then I'm just blocking out those basic colors on the outline for my face and my hand. Actually, I wasn't quite sure what to use for my hand, so I think I started with the pink tones. So that skin tone mixed with a little bit of red. And then I'm going to end up redoing the eyes a few times, but you can see my first attempt where I'm putting in, even though the eyelashes, and because he's looking down, you're not going to end up seeing a whole lot of his eye. I wanted to make sure that that detail was in there because the eyes are the focal point here. And then that hole in the wall, or hole in the fence, I just chose to do a dark gray circle to see if I had the placement correct, and then redid it to have it a little bit lower. And I'm just adding in a little bit of detail here for the nose, trying to get it the right shape. So within each of these color zones, the yellow on the forehead, the red in the middle of the face, and the gray at the bottom of the face, I'm going to also need to tint it from light shades to darker shades depending on where the light's hitting. So I'm mixing it with white, mixing each of those colors with white, and just parts of the face where the light should be shining directly, I'm making it have a lot more white in it, and the parts that are more shaded, I'm letting it be darker. And just continuing to outline the ears and the hairline and added more detail, making sure that as I'm stroking, it's going the direction that I want either the hair to go. I'm doing just little strokes. I used a fan brush and a flat number 8 brush to get that texture on the hair. And just made sure that I was doing strokes in the direction that the hair was going. And the same with the face. When I was laying down the first part of the face, I wasn't paying attention to the direction, and then I realized how much that actually matters. So when you're laying down the paint, pay a lot of attention to what direction you're doing your strokes in. So to do the fence, I took that gray color that I used for the background and mixed in a little bit more black. And because I had that skin tone color and it's brown, I put a little bit of that on my palette too. So I'm just using my brush to shade anywhere that the fence was darker, and just paying attention to the strokes again, starting from the top of the wood and just bringing it down, and just making sure to use a variety of different shades between that light gray and that darker gray. So here I'm mixing in a little bit of blue and red with a lot of white. and I didn't quite like how that looked. So I ended up giving that paint to my kids to paint with and tried again. And this is going to be my shirt color. So I'm just outlining where the darker parts are, which will be the creases in the shirt, any stitching, and then the lighter parts where that light is hitting it, and just focusing on the big picture, doing that front part, the darker shade of blue, and the back, the lighter shade of blue, and just adding in that darker blue for any of the crease lines. The fingers and the hand were the part that I had the hardest time with, oddly, because I would think an arm shape would be pretty easy, but for some reason, when it went up into the hand, that was really tough for me to do as a beginner. And a lot of it really has to do with shading. There's different types of shading, and I forget all the names of them, but there's where the object blocks the light. So around each of the fingertips you have a spot where the light is completely blocked. And so you want a really dark shade on that wood to show that the light's not hitting it. And you also have the reflected light that is bouncing off of the wood and getting partially into the crack. So you get a lot of this mix of different things going on with light that is really hard to paint when you're a beginner and to pay attention to. So you're not only trying to account for like a shadow basically, but also where that light is bouncing back and the colors are mixing and just creating this ambient different lighting. So here I'm paying a lot more attention to how I am doing the brush strokes and making sure that they're curving with the shape of the face. And that made a huge difference in how the skin tone looks. And here I'm adding the shading underneath him. I think at first it kind of looked like a monster, and now it's starting to take the shape of a boy. You can see I'm redoing the eyes. I had them looking a little bit too far up, and so I'm shifting the eyes to make it look like he's glancing more through that hole, and that's going to mean bringing the eyes back, elongating them a little bit, and then adding a wider top lid. You can see my son actually came through the back door there. When I first painted him as well, I feel like I used too much of a range of skin tone. My dark was very dark and my light was very light. And I realized it was actually should have been much more subtle. So for him, it's a pretty light range. I'm adding a lot of white. And my dark spots are only slightly darker. Even though they look drastic, it was really just a little bit of that darker brown, that darker skin tone I'm adding for those shadow parts. And then there's the eye redone, so that's looking more through that hole. So what I'm doing for the eyes is I'm taking a little bit of gray. You don't use straight white. You want to use a little bit more of a gray as the base for the eye. I'm putting my iris where I want, so I'm just using black. And then I painted around that brown. And then adding a little bit of white on the eye itself, just to show that reflected light. And there's the eyelid going on to really make it look like he's looking down through that hole. And I'm reshaping that cheek again, paying attention to my brush strokes. And you can see here especially how the slightest shift in shading of that skin tone really makes a huge difference of just how that facial shape is coming out. It'll make him look either thinner, wider, and just a slightly different stroke or a slightly different shade really affects the face. I found the portrait really challenging because of that. And it was a really good exercise to just go over and rework it till I got the right shape I wanted. And here I'm adding that shading around the fingers, that cast shadow. And I think that's actually the term for it, the cast shadow that's coming out from where each of the fingers is blocking the light. And I wasn't happy with my original hand, so I'm going over and repainting it. Same with that next spot. It took me quite a few attempts. Oh, and there's my son painting right next to me. So there's his artwork as well. Look at all that green going on. I'm just continuing to work in the shading. So anywhere those cast shadows, anywhere that he would be blocking the light, and in this case this is outdoor lighting, so the sun is above him and a little bit behind. So my cast shadows will be below and a little bit to the left. And then taking into account the ambient lighting too. And just touching up any spot that I felt like my skin tones had too dramatic of a shift, I'm coming in and bringing back skin tones that are closer to the same color that are in the spot next to it. I felt like I went too deep with the shadows, and so I'm redoing the skin color to make those differences a little more subtle. And here I'm reworking over the shirt, adding a second layer. And because acrylics are semi-transparent, you'll still be able to see those wrinkle lines that I put in before that are the darker blue. I'm just going over it with one more layer